Awesome. Okay.
You.
It is 6:02 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. What's January 4th, the first meeting of the school year. So happy New Year. Happy New Year. We've got a lot of folks on the call today, so that's fantastic. So, but it's 6:03 now, and I'd like to officially call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Nelson,
Here.
Lanier,
Here.
Griggs,
Here.
Blackman,
Here.
Paredes,
Here.
Leedstra,
Here.
Horace.
Here, and a quorum is present. Good to see all of your faces. Okay, so we have a few, not an incredibly long agenda, but certainly some important items that we want to cover or need to cover this evening. So the first thing on the list are audience comments. And I do know that we certainly received at least a few questions and comments from parents. So I assume you will address them either now or in your superintendent's report.
Sure. Kind of just combine the two just a little bit, but we did receive two comments, as you said. I certainly want to start with saying Happy New Year to all of you, and it's great to see all of your faces. We did receive two comments focused on a couple of different areas. One, kind of in that logistic range, looking at teacher vaccines and frankly, what that is going to mean to our staff members, what it will mean to our community. Information sharing around those vaccines, how the process work for parents selecting programs, and whether or not they need to make a change, will it be flexible? And then will teachers be expected to teach in person and online at the same time? So a couple of those we won't have answers to, especially anything around the vaccine. We're just not prepared to go down that path yet. And then as we roll out some additional information later in the evening, we can talk to some of them. But primarily our teachers will teach, for the most part, either in person or remotely and not both. And unfortunately, that may not be possible in all situations, especially when it comes to specials and some of those smaller programs, but certainly maintaining our teachers' focus, just like we did in all of our previous reopening plans, is a major goal of ours. The other comment, frankly, identified a number of things that we should be cautious about as we're considering reopening in February, including the fact that children may get sick, adults may get sick, may have bad consequences from that, and just being very clear about why we're making any decision that we do, whether it's tonight, January 25th, February 16th, and so on. So we'll be sure to respond directly to both of those parents tomorrow, and we'll post, of course, the responses on the website with this board packet.
Okay, so just to be clear, the parents or community members who sent questions, you answered part of it now, but you're going to follow up with them directly.
Yes.
Okay.
Directly.
As best you can.
As best I can, as best we can.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, as best as you can, because information is changing on a regular basis. And but as all parents, especially those who are working and trying to make the difficult decision on what to do next, and we understand that it's contingent upon what the district is trying to do or thinking about doing next. So we absolutely understand it. We are all parents as well, so we are also anxious to come to some decisions when we can and when we have enough information to do so. So okay, so you will follow up with them, and then of course if there are other folks on the call tonight who have additional questions or concerns that they want to reach out to us about, they can also send an email to the board email or directly to you as well.
Absolutely, just a shameless plug. It is boardcomments@sd161.org. And we always share all that information, certainly with the board, but we certainly post those questions and the answers with this packet. And especially as we're moving into this next phase, whatever this next phase is, you know, the questions that we received, we'll just put in our reopening plan frequently asked questions document because it's new, vital information. So we certainly encourage community members, District 161 stakeholders to email, ask questions, leave comments, because we'll take that information and we'll apply it. So it all goes to use.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And for people who do send emails to the board comments, we all do get them. So we all do see them. So I don't want people to think that it just sort of floats out into space somewhere. So we absolutely get them.
Michelle,
Okay.
on that point, could you just sketch out what the response protocols look like for that, so that community members should not expect 7 different replies, but rather one voice on that?
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. So typically I will be the one who will respond and just to confirm that we have received your email. And then Dana, Dr. Smith and his team will respond directly to the email, but you typically will not receive 7 different email responses. We really try and honor and respect that we sort of have one voice. And so we like to acknowledge that we received the message, but then we always turn it over to Dr. Smith and his team to do the direct follow-up. But we all do see the messages. And of course, we follow up with, Dana individually as well. So thanks, Steve. That's, and by the way, that's in any email. So it's just good for people to know that whenever you're sending a message to all of us, we absolutely take them all very seriously, but you will often just receive one email response from the board president, and then the direct, more detailed response should come from Dr. Smith. Okay, next item. This is one of those where I wish we could be in person. So Parker Junior High virtual theater participants.
Yes, and I believe we have the sponsors with us tonight, Lauren Rupert and Emily Nicotra. If you weren't able to jump in to participate on this evening, I have to tell you, it was just incredible, absolutely incredible. The effort of our kids, the talent of our kids, really spectacular. They raised a lot of money for a good cause. So I don't want to steal their thunder necessarily, but Lauren, Emily, do you guys want to unmute and talk a little bit about the program and the performances?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. We were absolutely thrilled with how it all came together. So for those who weren't able to be there, or maybe our elementary families, our students, we had about 57 students who participated in the program, and they wrote and produced 7 short films that we live streamed on Friday, December 11th. And instead of ticket sales that we would normally take, the students voted on an organization to raise money for Make-A-Wish Illinois. We set our goal to raise $600 because we just weren't sure with the pandemic, and ended up raising $2,325 with the support of this absolutely incredible community. So we are just absolutely thrilled with how well everything went, and we are looking forward to starting theater up again in the spring.
She covered everything. I got
Sorry.
I think what was exciting for me is to see kids that, 4 years ago were very timid elementary kids who maybe didn't find their footing yet, didn't find that group that they really connected with. And to see their voices and to see their affect, I was blown away. I was blown away. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think the coolest part was that because we're virtual, we were able to get a different subset of kids that we normally wouldn't be able to pull into the theater department. Like we had kids who did video editing. Like Miss Crawford thought I did the video editing. I did not. The kids did all of the video editing, and kids would compose music for their scores. So those were kids we normally wouldn't have been able to include in our theater production. It was just so cool to be able to get another, a different batch of kids.
Absolutely. I obviously to echo what Michelle said, in person is certainly the way to go. But it's experiences like this that really kind of demonstrate that there are different ways to address all of these issues. And frankly, coming out of this, we want to leverage some of those skills moving forward, whether it's the video editing or, again, finding opportunities for kids to get involved in a program that they may not typically try, but to take a risk on and have a great result. So really just kudos to the both of you. Kudos to the kids. Very proud of everyone. Steve.
Do we even, this is like a dream come true for marketing for people to move here to our school. It really is. And, you guys are, I'm your number one fans. Although my wife would argue with that, but, is there any way we have an archive of this where we could really, reference this moving forward? Because this is the kind of thing that I think people move across states to be a part of in schools. And so the part that really got me was, the kids did this, as much as it's not, and I think what happens in some programs, is that we really want these, very polished things, but it's, as much as when it's the kids actually doing things, I think that's when it really becomes like, super fantastic. And you guys are super fantastic, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you did miss the show, it's still up on our Parker YouTube page. There is a footprint. It's still posted on the Parker's YouTube page.
Yep. So we have a posted on YouTube. It's also attached to this agenda as well. If you're a parent out there and you click on Parker Junior High Virtual Theater, it will be right there in the link. We also had a pretty big online presence with Amy Kent when it originally launched, and so then what this turns into is, just sharing that information, not only with the village, but other partners who may want to take a snippet here, a snippet there, and insert it into some marketing materials.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. So thanks to the both of you. Can't wait to see you in person and to see all the kids in person. But I will tell you, this was certainly not a second place prize. I thought it was an excellent production. I had a great time. I hope your kids did, and you as well. So thanks to the both of you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And we will be for everyone looking out for that. Hopefully sometime this week we'll be putting out applications to do it all again.
Can't wait to see that.
Even more.
That's right. Can't wait to see those cameos. They were fantastic.
Thank you. Getting a profile picture.
So
I think Ms. Nakotra, you just said it best. I think for all that stinks about us having to be remote, one of the silver linings is that it has allowed students who you normally would not be able to tap for a lot of different things, right, to be engaged. And so being remote has actually given a whole new meaning to accessibility and inclusion. And so I just commend you both for being brave enough to put this on remotely and providing students the opportunity who would have already been involved in this anyway, but more importantly, those who would have never thought about being engaged in a theater production. So kudos to you both. It was fantastic. Okay, so we'll keep rocking and rolling. The next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report.
Touched on a few of the pieces earlier with the audience comments, but as you know, we returned to school today. We were supposed to have an institute day, but we ended up using that in the fall. So today was our return after winter break. And there's a lot happening this week that we'll talk about actually next. But realistically, we are approaching the second half of this school year focused on incredibly effective instruction, great assessment, forming strong relationships with our kids. And if we can end up in person, excellent. I mean, I think we have to make sure that we're providing excellent programming for our kids. And we'll have that conversation tonight. But at the end of the day, it comes down to good teaching and learning and connecting with our children. For the rest of this week, we know that we're going to send a parent letter and a parent survey tomorrow. We're also working on a staff survey that we'll send out with our timeline, and that will be due at the end of this calendar week. So that'll be on Sunday. So as we get into the next reopening plan discussion, we'll touch on a few more of the specifics, but really, as far as I'm concerned, what's driving my bus this week is making sure that we're sharing as much information as we possibly can so our parents can make effective decisions regarding in-person or remote learning for the rest of this school year, and making sure that our teachers are in a position to be safe and have everything that they need to serve our kids. So that's really what we're focused on for this week, and then certainly moving into applying all that information from the survey next week. So that's the end of my report.
And can you just remind people again when the survey will, sort of the life cycle of the survey that you're going to release?
Yep, absolutely. So as we get through the conversation tonight, we do have the draft questions in the survey in the actual report, but the survey will go out tomorrow once we have it translated. We've started all that work today, but once we have everything translated, we'll have everything out to our families probably mid to late afternoon tomorrow. And then once they receive it, everyone will have through next Sunday to get that information back and to select those programs. That's why we want to make sure that there's a lot of information in there. Once the survey closes next Sunday, that following Monday, we're starting to put together class lists, starting to put together transportation programs. Again, we don't know when the numbers will be appropriate to recommend a restart. We just want to make sure that when that happens, we are absolutely ready. So again, this is just part of the life cycle of planning and being prepared for any of the potential outcomes, hopefully one leading us towards being back in person in a safe manner shortly.
And then should the community, or do you anticipate this being the final parent survey that goes out specifically asking about parents or community preference for their child? Or is the assumption that you will do that? A fly, I'm sorry. What's a fly? It's like 20 degrees. Why is there a fly? I lost my train of thought, darn fly. Or are you thinking that each time we hit one of those timeline milestones that you'll talk about later on with regards to the reopening, will you reissue a survey each time to take the pulse of the community?
My recommendation would be to survey once.
Okay.
And then, and then deal with the one-offs, and inevitably we'll have some special situations, family changes, things of that nature that you just can't plan for, on January 7th for, later in February. And when those happen, we'll absolutely support our families. We'll support our staff members, make sure that, those kids are in a position to learn effectively. So.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to ask questions that I know.
Yeah.
We've got over 200 people now, and so I'm playing the role of parent.
Yeah, please do.
So potentially just once, and the survey will go out to parents and teachers?
Different surveys, but yes.
Right.
We're surveying technically 3 surveys. One survey for our remote from school and special ed and those pre-K EC children. Another survey for everyone else because that happens later, and then a staff survey as well.
Do either you or Amabel have, off the top of your head, do you recall what our participation rate has been in the previous surveys?
I don't. If I remember, I thought we were certainly over 1,000 responses last time. I think we were closer to 1,300. Amabel, do you remember?
Yeah, we got in terms of total responses, Michelle, or responses of in-person or remote.
In person versus remote. Yeah. So the goal, the point of my question is one, so we can just have, I think it's important for the people on the call and for the message to go out to the community about how very important it is for people to respond to the survey.
Sure.
So I know people might feel survey fatigue because it seems like we've been doing a lot, and we'll probably continue, maybe not on this, but on other stuff throughout the year. But I just want to make sure every single parent, every single household responds to the survey.
To answer that question for you, Michelle, we had 1,338 responses to the last time we had what's called a program selection survey. So big number, but we also
big number, but less than half.
No, but remember, families. Yeah, no, you're right. Less than half.
Yeah.
More than half. We're down a little bit, but to your point, we also made a lot of individual phone calls just to make sure that we followed up with those families. And so I could certainly anticipate some of that happening next Monday, just as we know families have a lot going on. I don't want someone to be in a program simply because their life situation didn't allow them to respond to a survey this week. So we'll certainly keep the pressure on, send the survey multiple times. Obviously, social media, we'll have it plastered there. The principals will put it out in their information. So we'll try to give multiple opportunities for our families to engage. And that will include individual phone calls as well to a number.
I think, Dana, you hit the nail on the head. You said this is not just really a survey. This is a program selection. This is a, where would you like to be if that potential date happens? Would you like to be in A or in B? And I think that's important to map out. Like, this isn't a, how are you feeling right now? This is a, where do you want to be?
Yes.
Type of a question, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's, always we shoot for 100% participation.
Yeah.
Right. But this is just such a very important decision. And I know that everybody is, rightfully on edge waiting for decisions to be made, but we can't do it without knowing what the will of the community is and what your preferences are. So, if everybody on this call can make sure that they reach out and they push out on their own social, Facebook and everything else to make sure our participation rate is as high as it can be.
If I may, should this be something that, to your point, that you are selecting a program that it's almost like re-registering for school, that we really should know one way or the other where you're going to go. I don't think people just stumble into kindergarten or to Parker, that there is some almost like a mandatory set of questions ahead of time. People should fill out something. I'm glad you're following up, but this is like a thing, something that's a little big to just randomly default to, one thing or the other. If you're, I don't know, if you're not actively participating. And, I really appreciate all that you're doing, because, I'm the first one who's guilty of not getting back to, school or something like that. Oh yeah, I forgot to, do this, which is, why I've married well. Someone upstairs is actually a lot better at this as a fail-safe. We can catch each other, but so I don't mean this to be critical, but it seems like this is something, and Michelle, to your point, this is extremely important that we have as close to 100% as possible, not just how do you feel about this or how do you feel about this other thing. So it's less of a survey, I think, and more of almost a mid-year registration process for our programming.
That's a good way to look at it. So it's certainly very important, and we'll make sure that we're very clear just about how important it is. We'll put a full court press on to make sure that we reach out to all those families, and we'll send it out multiple times. Typically, we'll get 95% of our answers by Wednesday, typically. Usually within the first 48 hours of putting the survey out, most people have a response, but that'll give us at least a good idea of who we want to reach out to either more directly, work with our teachers and principals to target some communication.
Okay.
Dana, for those parents that are hinging their decision on whether there's a teacher change, are students potentially facing a teacher change even if they choose to stay remote?
Yes.
Okay. And should a parent, how long are the parents going to be stuck with the decision they make? If they choose hybrid and 2 weeks from now they have buyer's remorse, or the other way around.
It's a lot easier to go out, right? So here, why don't we just hop into the discussion item since we're doing it. But Cam, to your question, it's a lot easier, if a family says, yes, we're all in-person hybrid, please. And then, there is a change in situation and they want to go remote. That's a lot easier than, inserting a student into a classroom in person. But, there's always flexibility. I mean, we don't do zero tolerance for anything else. We won't do it for this. And so we'll try to be as flexible as possible. One of the pieces that kind of hurt the process the last time, frankly, was the amount of changes. And there was a lot of back and forth and, parents making, multiple decisions about one child, remote, hybrid. And we just won't be able to allow that because it just stops the process for us and we can't move forward with some things. But we'll try to build in some initial pieces. We can certainly look at if we want to go by quarter, that's certainly one option. Hopefully when that fourth quarter begins in, end of March, we're in a certainly much different position and people may feel differently about their children attending in person.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good question.
Okay. So I guess the floor is still yours because let's just go right into the discussion.
Go right into it here. I'll share my screen here. Okay. So I'm going to ask Amabel and Jackie to join me for this discussion. The objectives for this discussion are primarily focused on a couple of different areas. One that's probably the most pressing is January 25th. And we're looking at a soft roll-in, just like we did earlier in the year when we brought our remote from school and some of our special education students into the buildings. And so we'll look to do that again on the 25th. And so we have a lot of information to share just on that process. And then we'll have a little bit of conversation about our preparations after the 25th. We'll talk about the parent survey, kind of reiterate what that timeline is for decision-making, and certainly answer as many questions as we can. So Amabel and Jackie, would you like to take us through the report as you see it and share some information?
Sure, absolutely. So Jackie will start with talking through the special education and the early childhood and preschool programs returning again starting with that January 25th date. And then we'll talk about the remote students from the building. If you recall, we had a small group of students at each building that were returning for remote instruction from the building, just to give those students some extra supervision. And we would revisit doing that as well for the 25th. So Jackie, I'll let you start with special ed.
Sure. So if you look down a little bit further there, we have the draft of our implementation plan. So first, sending out a parent program commitment survey. As you had said, Christina, it does need to be commitment to what program they would be choosing. And then as we get that information, we will see what parents would be willing to do. So we're going to be a little bit more aggressive this time. For our instructional students in kindergarten through 8th grade, we would like to do 5 days a week and do the regular school day. And you can see the times there. And then as far as looking at our pre-K and EC, we would like to also offer them an increase. Last time we were only able to really do 1 day a week. But this time we would do 2 days a week with 1 day being remotely. And the purpose or the reason that preschool and EC is separated a little bit differently is just because of the fact that there are more students in those classrooms. And I want to make sure that we have enough sessions open throughout the week to allow for social distancing and making sure that we are not, we are following all safety protocols, and having 23 and 4-year-olds in a classroom would probably not be that ideal. So we want to offer some time in person and increasing that from our last rollout, but also giving the flexibility to have more sessions to spread the students out throughout the day. And then if we look back up at the top, so that those are the options. And then the survey will go out tomorrow with a letter explaining everything to parents also. And then my goal is for the teachers to have their class list by January 12th, and making sure that we have everybody placed where they need to go. My next step would be, as I did before, Amabel and I both did a meeting with teachers when we had our remote in-person students returning and our instructional kids coming. We went over in detail, and Kathy was part of that. Kathy Knauer was part of that meeting too, along with all the staff that would be part of this return. And we just kind of go through everything, make sure everybody knows expectations, what the plan is for students coming back, and just giving a time too for teachers to share any concerns or anything, as we move forward. And then looking at giving teachers also a teacher prep time. I did email our instructional teachers to kind of see, and our preschool teachers to get a gauge on how many days they would need to be back before the 25th. And the consensus was mostly about 2 to 3 days to kind of set up classrooms and, to have that flexibility to come in and make sure that they were prepared. A lot of the classrooms are somewhat set up because we did do this rollout before, so a lot of the teachers already do have some things, but of course they need planning time, they need all of that. So we would determine what those days are. And then as far as looking at our students or our teachers coming back, we would say that the 22nd would be the day. And then again, that would be our special education teachers, as far as our instructional teachers, preschool teachers, social workers, OT, PT, our deans and paraprofessionals would return to the building. And OT and PT, we would be doing those services in person because we do contract with Heilman, and they were able to do it before, and we shut down for that adaptive pause for a little while, but they are also willing to come back into person too, to be able to do that. Any questions or?
Would OT?
Oh, go ahead. Is that Steve?
Yeah, just real quick. Just would OT services still function the same way for kids who weren't coming back in remote, or?
Yes. So we would offer those in-person services again. So some students that are, if they want to, they can come back, but they would still be offered remotely. We're still offering those remote options for students. As far as the instructional students, also, I do have the disclaimer, or I don't know if it's a disclaimer, but just being very transparent that teachers may change, in regards to, I have to see, how many students are coming back in person, but we will still, that's a good point, Steve, we'll still be offering that remote for those students too. It just will look, just don't know how that will look quite yet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Question. This is David Lanier, by the way. So I do appreciate the explanation about the instructional students, but for those special ed students that don't fall into that category, is there a plan on doing anything with them at this point?
Yes, so Amabella will speak to that too. So we are going to, we established a criteria of sort to look at as far as returning to school for remote learning. as we did before. And one of the criteria that we did talk about was having or offering for our resource students to come back in person and our tier 3 students. Now, those services will still be remotely done. However, they will have the benefit of having a teacher or a paraprofessional, not necessarily, it won't be a teacher, but a paraprofessional with them to help kind of, navigate those services a little bit more appropriately, or a little bit more access to them.
Okay, so just for clarity, so the plan that you just spoke of is inviting back the special ed students who we had invited back for a hybrid model before the holiday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the difference is that now those group of students will actually have the opportunity to be in school full time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And can you remind us how many students are we talking about?
There's about 82 altogether. Last time we had about 44. I'm not including the remote in person. I think there was more of those students. But as far as the special education students, instructional students, we had about 44 that had come back. So we were a little, about 50%.
Okay. And that's total K through 8.
Right.
Okay. And so then per David's question regarding students who are not necessarily in our special ed program, but are tier 3, and data from all of the different sources that you use indicates that they need a deeper level of intervention. Amabel is getting ready to talk about that process and the potential of that category of students being able to return.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. Just want to make sure we all understand. Okay.
And this part is pretty consistent with what we did before the Thanksgiving break. Those students were previously attending remote learning from the building 5 days a week, and we would be reducing that to 4 days a week now. So Monday through Thursday would be the change with that. But these are students, as we mentioned, who are receiving resource support, our tier 3, and really making sure that we're making some more targeted and intentional decisions around which students really need that support of doing their remote learning from the building. They will be supervised by our support staff and our paraprofessionals at each building, of course, with all of our distancing and protocols that are in place. We would continue doing that. But again, this gives these students who may be struggling more with engagement with remote learning, a little bit more structure and support to keep them going. So it's a smaller number of students. And again, we will extend, each school will extend the invitation to parents and talk about why the student may need the support to be in person. But depending on the response from the parents, that will impact the number of students, and we'll essentially go through all of our criteria and work the list as much as we can until we get a manageable number of students who will be in person for that program.
And those students will still be, so they will be in the building, still working remotely, but sitting next to a paraprofessional who will help them during the time that they're there.
Yeah, they will be in a room that is supervised by a paraprofessional, understanding that we have to still maintain distancing and, balancing the number of staff that we have available at each building. We use our large spaces. So for example, at the junior high school, we used our lunchroom. We can use our the bigger spaces that we have at each building to be able to do the distancing. Again, much of it will come down to how many students we actually get confirmed to attend in person, but they are able to log in from the building, participate in their classes, and get support and check in with the paraprofessional throughout the day. This also eliminates the issues with technology or internet connection specifically that some students may be running into from home.
And the students who will be there potentially all day, can you speak to how lunch will be handled?
Yes, those students get a brown bag lunch, and they are already seated distance, so just spread out at the tables throughout the large spaces, and they are able to eat their lunch in that space and clean up as they go. They have separate lunch periods. For example, they're just using the junior high as an example by their grade level. That depending on how many students per grade level are eating lunch at the same time. And they just eat lunch as they would if they were in person by following their schedule according to the remote learning schedule. And that allows us the space for any amount of cleanup that needs to happen in between and things like that.
Okay.
So one of the threads that hopefully comes through in all of these conversations is we really had to look at what we're currently offering to our families and our students and where we're looking to go. And so as we had all of these conversations, the first rung of the ladder that we had to step on was, will this plan be safe? And if you remember a lot of our earlier conversations, I was really, really tough on lunch. And as I spoke with other superintendents, as we spoke with people in other districts who were able to do it safely, I moved off of that dime with the new information. And I think we feel a lot better about running lunch, because that was always a big hurdle for us, in a very safe and deliberate manner. The other piece that really we had to take into a lot of consideration, we can't recommend a plan that's going to be less effective for our kids. And so, going from a full day of current remote learning to maybe a half day or something in between wasn't as palatable to us, because we're already doing that. And so as we were looking through this whole process, again, starts with safety, and then it really comes down to maximizing the instructional time for the kids, getting them into the buildings, and certainly being more than what we're offering now. And Jackie touched on this other piece, and Steve and Michelle also did, and Amabel and David, actually everyone. We have to be able to offer all of the services that we were offering in the past, and hopefully do so with a little bit more effectiveness, because we'll get some of those kids in person and really focus on certainly speech, OT, PT. But we also have a number of children who need access to mental health services who aren't identified. They're not going to show up in our database search for maybe a child who has an individualized education program, who needs help. But if you talk to our social workers, they spend an incredible amount of time working with kids that don't have a diagnosed need. They just need to talk. And so part of that piece, bringing kids in, will increase the access that they'll have to our specialists and to a lot of those specialized services as well. All right, Annabelle.
I have a question about our students receiving services that are in the general ed population, which is that the right time to bring this up?
Sure.
Or if they're, okay, how about this? If they're coming in to be, if they're tier 3, so this would be, make it the right time, right? So those
Sure, yeah.
tier 3, so those tier 3 students who are coming in, who choose to be remote from school, they would be getting remote services from within the building.
Correct.
So
Correct, right.
okay, and that's fine. So are those minutes, are we using our time in the best manner possible by doing that remote? Is there any way to not do that remote but still maintaining some sort of distance? I'm just wondering how the dynamic of receiving services through a screen is truly beneficial for really meeting those minutes that are needed, really for instructional and for our tier students. Does that make sense?
It does, but they're different conversations.
Okay.
And part of that reasoning is that whether it's a tier 3 student or a student who receives special education resource, that's certainly not for all of their day. And so it would be a part, right? And so trying to schedule some of those special sessions or pull-out sessions in a typical day. It may happen at 10:50 from 10:50 to 11:30. Well, that's not necessarily possible because you may have 4 kids in one resource room and another set of kids in another, and trying to pull them together for those services. What I would recommend to those families strongly is to choose in-person learning. Okay. Christina, you good?
I am.
Well-
I just, yes, I think I'm, I'm just wishing it was 2019 is all. So
Well, let's go for 2021. That way, this isn't in front of us, it's behind us.
maybe fall 2021 then. Yeah.
There you go.
I think the important thing is that whether a parent has a child who falls in that category, Christina, whether or not they choose to do in person or stay remote, that they are still receiving the intervention that they need. I mean, nothing, I think, takes the place of you being able to sit, close to your teacher and, they be able to look over your work as you are doing it. But if a parent still decides that they want to be remote, we still will absolutely be providing those services.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think, Dana, can I speak to that too, just for a
course.
moment? So one of the things when we were thinking about that too, Christina, having the resource students receive services in person, we wanted to stay away from any type of synchronized teaching too. We didn't want the teacher to have to be teaching remotely to a group, on the computer and some in person. And that speaks to Dana's point about the scheduling, and to Michelle's point, we wanted to keep those groups coherent and making sure that that instruction is being delivered in that way. And it would not be schedule wise. We would not be able to separate it. And we wouldn't want a teacher having to teach to a group on a computer and some in person too, because I think we would lose, some of that. We would just lose the, I'm looking for the word, but just they're doing a great job already. So I think we would lose some of it if we had to then kind of navigate between the screen and people in front too. Does that make sense?
You would dilute the instruction.
Thank you. Thank you.
That does. That is helpful.
Okay, go.
And that is very helpful. In the same breath, I know we've been doing great, but
I know.
doing the making sure that our students that need those minutes met, I think, is just top priority for me, because I know how easy it is to slip and to slip behind, and I think that's where as our attention is always focused on our students and giving them the best. But I think here in this space, exactly what we're talking about right now, minutes met for services are where we need to put 110%, which I know you guys are doing. I just want to make sure that with this new program switch, it's still going to be as effective as.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we had to start. We had to offer another version of schooling that was as effective currently as what we're doing now. And you're hitting the nail on the head. We have to make sure that the kids who need elevated services are getting those, and that we're trying to be everything for all kids. I know our teachers do that all the time. It's impossible, but somehow they certainly pull it off. And as we move into this next part of the conversation, I just want to remind everyone that yes, we're talking about 4 days here, but this is not schooling as we've known it. Every single one of our previous COVID protocols are going to be in place. We will have to self-certify. Students will be in masks. Students will be in cohorts every day. We won't have any groups larger than 50. That's why lunch at Parker becomes problematic depending on the number of kids that come back. So we have to remember that this is, it's a sterilized version. It's on one page, what we're looking at here, but there's about 25 pages of processes behind it, certainly still on our website from before. But we have to know that, yes, returning to school does not mean returning to the way that it used to be. It means we're going to come back when it's appropriate with a ton of protocols, because as I mentioned before, that first rung on the ladder is making sure that we have a safe environment for our students and staff. If we can't affirmatively answer that question, then we really can't move forward. So passing that, we really then focus on the instructional pieces. So as we looked at a hybrid option, again, open to all students, we're looking at Monday through Thursday, keeping Friday remote. And the value with that is we've had a lot of success this year working with our teachers on those Friday afternoons. As we talked, this was at this point a couple of months ago, but the reason we stopped the instructional day at 1 o'clock on Friday afternoons is because it gave us an opportunity to get teachers together, not only across grade levels within a building, but across grade levels and departments between schools. And what we've found is that sharing of information has been great. And we've had a lot of success sharing ideas, whether it's on assessment or instruction, getting our specialist teachers together just to talk about engagement, all of these different pieces that we really haven't had a chance to address. And especially now, as we're sharing so many students, as students are in different programs, as we're kind of running, two schools within a school here, our teachers have to be on the same page. And in order to do that, they need the time. And so we have information here just about the start and the end times, but truly it would be Monday through Thursday in person with Friday being remote. Still have that, we call it a partial day ending at about 1 o'clock so that we can continue with our articulation and collaboration work, not only between buildings, but across as well. And so just a couple of the pieces that I already mentioned. I have the district reopening plan linked here. We've updated some of that information and we'll continue to update not only the processes, schedules, times, et cetera, but also, as I mentioned earlier, those frequently asked questions as well. So as we receive those in emails, board comments, phone calls, we'll keep that document updated. Because of the scheduling changes, we do know that there will be some situations where children have to change teachers. Unfortunately, the only way to prevent changing teachers is to stay remote. That is the only way that we can guarantee that there aren't any teacher changes that are unanticipated. Not, you're a junior high student and you're going to take this encore classes instead of that one. And then finally, as I mentioned, that cohort piece will be real. It'll be very important, especially as we're looking at lunch, contact tracing, moving through the buildings, all of those different pieces that go into a reopening plan. We'll want to make sure that we can trace those kids, that we know where they're at, that we know who they're around, so that if in fact we do have a COVID outbreak in our buildings, we can trace it, we can track it, we can make recommendations on how to move forward with the classroom, the grade level, and the building in general. So we have a draft. Was that a question?
No, I'm sorry. Continue, please.
Okay, no, you're good. You're good. So we do have a draft of the survey, gathering just some general information, obviously names, program selection, transportation, but then asking a couple of open-ended questions at the end to gather some feedback, whether they're general questions. Hopefully we'll have some answers to. We can just send those back right away. I think that'd be fantastic. But if not, we'll make sure to find those answers for the parents. And then any feedback that they have for remote learning. Remote learning isn't going to end with this hybrid program. We will have families and local data would say we'll have a number of families probably that choose to stay remote, and that's perfectly fine. We want to improve that program as we move on. We know that remote learning, as I said, will be here through the end of the year, but even into next year when there are snow days and special situations, if we have to mobilize this plan, we want it to be as effective as possible. So we'll seek feedback on any adjustments that we can make through the end of the year for the program. And then finally, just looking at our timetable for returning, we'll get looking for the go-ahead on the 25th to bring back our remote from school students and our special education children. And then as we move towards January 25th, we'll want to start thinking about decisions for later in February. We've identified that our first, call it restart date for our hybrid students would be January 16th. And so when we meet on January 25th, we would like to be in a position to make a recommendation. Yes, we feel that our local numbers, our local COVID numbers are in a good position, that our protocols are in shape, that we have all the resources and everything that we need. Yes, let's reopen, or no, we're not ready to reopen because either the holiday spike or any other number of things that could happen. And so if we move past the 25th, our next step would be to make a decision on that night. If we want to schedule a board meeting for that following week, that would still give us plenty of time to reopen on February 16th. But as we approach and pass that February 16th date, our recommendation is the next reopening window would become March 8th and then March 7th. And if you see the chart, there are plenty of opportunities for us to come together to talk about the data, the metrics, the programming, all these different pieces, and then ultimately make the best decision for our community.
So Steve, I know you have a question, but just for a point of clarity, you do need from the board tonight a nod. We can figure out this, we need an official vote to move forward for the special ed and preschool.
Yes. Yeah, I know we don't need a formal vote, but we do need a nod
Okay.
to move forward with that. And then on the 25th, as we're making that larger action, we could decide if we want to take an official board action. That would probably be my recommendation.
Okay, and so our nod is for our special education and our preschool students to return for a full day, but it also includes the population that Amabel spoke of, our tier 3 students and students who are identified through other data points that require more intervention.
Correct.
So those are the categories of students where you need a nod from us to go forward for the January 25th target date.
Correct, Michelle. Thank you.
This is David Lanier again. And before I give a nod one way or the other, I just want to ask a very general question. With approval, or I'm sorry, with a nod, is there a immediate financial impact that we need to be aware of, or not?
Well, yes, I think I'd say there's a few. So the reason that we moved discussion ahead of action tonight is because one of the action items is to rescind the honorable dismissal document that the board approved in December as we were looking at a potential reduction in force for our 2 District 161 bus drivers and up to 5 custodians. This would put us in a position where we could recommend, if we reasonably think that February 16th is an option, this would put us in a position to rescind that dismissal tonight. The other piece is we will, because this plan is more aggressive than our previous plan, I believe we'll have to activate maybe 1 or 2 buses, maybe more. So that will certainly eat into, we'll call them savings. We're just not being charged for transportation because of COVID. So yes, on that side, David, yes, certainly some additional charges that we'll have to face, but nothing on the staff side, they're primarily logistical.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And does that include all of the positions?
Yes, because we know that one of the pieces that we desperately need is additional disinfecting, constant cleaning during the day. And one of the beautiful things that Scott and his team has done is really worked on those schedules. So we're continually covered with our excellent custodial staff. They're always walking around wiping something off. So I've seen just that as a huge part of this process. Certainly keeping Normandy safe, probably where we have the most workers on any given day. But certainly as we expand to the elementary buildings and to Parker, we'll want to have a lot of coverage as well.
Okay.
Dana, did you describe the thresholds? Because you just mentioned that you are recommending for opening, that are attached to opening, because you seem to suggest that we would consider thresholds for February 16th. How are those different for January 25th?
It really comes down to class sizes and the number of students impacted. As Jackie said, realistically, we probably had, and Amabel, feel free to pipe in, we probably had a total of maybe 70 kids last time, spread across 5 different buildings. And so that number becomes way more manageable in those spaces, because not only is it less students, it's less staff, et cetera. So we feel way more comfortable with those groups, and we do not feel that it's an additional risk at this point. Our numbers are very close to when we decided to close earlier after our restart, our remote from school kids later this fall when we recently closed that. So our numbers are returning to those levels. And so that's why we feel more comfortable. I would not recommend, I certainly would not recommend a larger hybrid restart for the 25th because we don't have the numbers yet.
And then I have another question. What threshold will you be recommending then for the February 16th open?
That's where we need a little bit of discussion.
Okay.
Because the board will also have to come to grips with, making a community decision that other local organizations don't respond to.
Okay.
In layman's terms, we're definitely, kind of trains colliding here where we may make a recommendation to restart and Homewood 153 does not.
Okay.
I don't use the high school because they're just a different beast with the number of kids and their grade levels essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say our closest, comparable would be Homewood 153, and they're using a Homewood Flossmoor positivity rate is 5% as their first metric, and they're using up to 3. And we're currently sitting at 7.72. At our last board meeting where we met, we were at 7.82, and then it spiked maybe 1% and then came down just a little bit. So I would anticipate probably another spike in those numbers based on other local data. And if there is a holiday bump, if not, we should continue to maintain and decrease.
Okay. I do have a question also about your plan. You mentioned Friday being remote. I'm not sure what that means. Parker hasn't ended at 1 o'clock.
Correct. Yeah.
It's elementary only, yeah.
I should have clarified. It's elementary only. Sorry.
But will it be 1 o'clock and then remote for K-8 now, or no? Can you scroll to that part of the screen?
I can. There you go. And we put Parker on the same, or did we keep them 5? I can't remember at this point.
We did, yes. We kept everyone at 4 days a week in person, and then everyone remote on Fridays. And going back to Dana's point, on the elementary side, one of the reasons for keeping Friday were remote was because elementaries have been doing a half day of school. They've been getting out so that we can have meetings in the afternoons. So moving forward, if we did for the hybrid option, again, depending on what the survey responses are, the number of in-person yeses that we get, we would keep it at Monday through Thursday for everyone and Friday as a remote day for everyone.
So when you say remote, is there instruction on that day? Are they?
Yes, instruction, not an independent day, but remote learning. So live classes that day. But it would allow us to have some space in the buildings for just doing more cleaning, some more flexibility in the schedule. There may be a place where if we had some special services going on, we could still do those in person on Fridays. It really depends on what the survey responses are. But it would, and then it would also allow us to keep that elementary consistency with the half days on Friday.
Oh, okay. So elementary will still be half day on Friday. They'll end at 1 o'clock and then be done, but Parker will be a whole day remote.
Yeah, right now, but again, it really depends on the number of responses that we get for in-person. So as we're talking to districts in our community and also close to us and our surrounding areas, in our first iteration of the survey, just district-wide, we had in-person ranges from 50 to 60%. Recently in districts around us, we've had in-person yeses and closer to 30%. So when we're looking at setting up a model for example, a school the size of Parker, the difference between 30% of students in person and 60% is huge. And so we'll start with the wanting to have everyone in person for 4 days and doing that remote day. Depending on the numbers that we get, we may need to make adjustments, but we'll start with as aggressive as we can, and see where the numbers land us.
I guess one thing that I'm sticking here because I really want to understand this. When would the Parker teachers, if we did this way, when would they have that opportunity that the elementary teachers have to talk and plan? Where does that fit in for them in this?
Yeah, well, we have, Parker has planned periods built into our day. We have Plan A and Plan B collaboration times. So we do utilize that time throughout the week, a period a day to be able to talk and meet and collaborate. So it is a little bit different schedule-wise for the junior high school, just in terms of how our schedules are built. And then there are also just timeframes that contractually are different in terms of how the schedules are set up. So Parker's Plan A and Plan B schedule time is that's honoring our contract as well.
Okay.
So Carolyn, the other piece to that, just as an aside, remember we were moving to a middle school model. And so we protected a lot of that time in the schedule, and Amabel and her team were able to do that as we moved this way as well.
Okay, perfect. And then maybe you could just spend a little time for me talking about with the, like, if we do get numbers that we're comfortable with in terms of, like, let's say we get 50% of our students back. Can you talk a little bit about things like gym, lunch, music, orchestra, band? What does that look like? And how does that work? I'm also trying to think of questions that I have, but that I think parents will have too as they're trying to figure this out.
Yeah, if you recall, our first go round with this in the fall, lunch was especially for the junior high, lunch was the big deal of how are we going to manage lunch and socially distance for schools the size of the junior high. And so we set up the schedule to eliminate doing lunch. So again, depending on the number, the percentage of students that we would have in person, we may need to take a look at doing remote learning in the afternoon, meaning live classes, but having students do those remotely, and to being strategic about what classes are offered in person. If we get 60% of our students in person at the junior high, lunch may be a challenge to do in person. It really just depends on how those numbers fall. If we get closer to 20 to 30% in person, lunch seems a little more realistic, when we would still have to get creative with space and we would still need to do distancing, but that's a little bit more manageable than talking about 60% of our students doing lunch. So a lot does hinge on whether or not parents respond yes to in-person instruction, and then we would go from there.
And you feel that that would work for music, band, gym? That's all contingent on how many. I mean, band is a little different, right? Because you need to.
It is. Some of those programs would need to remain remote. Band in particular would need to remain remote. And we're, again, going back to our recognition earlier in the meeting, we haven't stopped those programs. Those programs are still going. So I wouldn't see a lot of reason to say that we need to completely flip them back to in-person. So those are the kinds of things that we will need to take a close look at. Also, yes, also the percentage of students who are in person, if they're actually taking band or orchestra or whatever the program is, they may not be participants in those programs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I thought I was clear until Carolyn just asked those questions. Now I'm not clear anymore. So let me ask a direct question. Are we doing extracurricular activities for the in-person students versus remote students?
It depends, based on Illinois State Board of Education and the Illinois Department of Public Health guidance.
Okay, so if we are, then are we affording the remote students the same opportunity that we're affording in-person students?
Of course.
Okay, because I don't see how the remote are getting the same that the instructions are getting for extracurricular. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, as Annabelle said, we're already running those remotely. So, looking at, an extracurricular that is, and I would call it a class, right? So let's look at orchestra, right? Well, you can still figure out how we're going to have those practices or theater productions in a remote setting. We won't have any choice other than to program for in-person and remote kids, because we are going to have a considerable number of our kids who choose to remain remote. So we have to make that accommodation.
David, if I could just illustrate quickly from my own experience, I have a program that none of my kids can meet because it's a technical theater program in a building where kids aren't allowed into. And so the challenge with each program is really to find a way to make your club or activity meaningful. And when you do that, sometimes it helps you to grow in a way that you would not otherwise been able to do that. And I think that, certainly the theater department has really leaped a high hurdle that they may not have done if it were as it was last year. So, for each of the extra offerings that we have at our school, I think that we're given the circumstance, there is equity in their offering for the context of what the activity is. So, I mean, band where you're breathing through a big, a metal thing. Maybe that's not something we should all be in the same room for, but they have somehow managed to be very effective. The same with drama has managed to find themselves a way to be very effective, even though they're not all on the stage milling around. So this is, it's kind of like fish or cut bait. And yet we are, and when I say we, I really mean the very talented students and faculty who are in these programs at our schools have really gone and redefined boundaries in a way that I wouldn't have imagined last year. So I think that we're always going to find a way, to the best of our ability to develop our programs.
Right. And, when you bring up extracurriculars, our expanded extracurricular program started today, right, Annabelle?
Mm-hmm.
And so, those are all remote, and plenty of offerings that we've never had an opportunity to have before. And so we've got kids participating at all different levels in activities across buildings, within buildings, et cetera. And those are going to be remote, and they'll probably stay remote because, again, you're going to have children in both programs. And there's just no real effective way to do some of those programs in person under these requirements. And so some things will have to stay remote, and that's okay because we are implementing them and we are living in our new reality, but we're also doing very well in that as well. So certainly want to make sure that there's parity between what we're offering in person and remotely, but I think we would all agree that that in-person experience, no matter what it is probably more effective.
So Dana, so just to be clear, so for parents on the phone, so in any of these potential dates that are on the timetable, if we vote and approve to bring students back, then students will be coming, you'll either be 100% remote or you would be almost 100% back in the building with the exception of Friday.
Correct.
Okay, so no more, I remember there was some iteration ago where was, students would not be there until 3, right? And so, okay, so that's gone away. So if students are returning, then they are returning full-time Monday through Thursday, and Friday will be working remotely. So can we do, this is the 2-part question. So one, if we can give, Dana and his team the nod for the 25th, if people feel comfortable doing that, then I think we should do that. And then the second question is, Carolyn, you asked a question a little while ago about, actually, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically, what are we looking at to make the decision, right? And so it sounds like what we are focusing on in terms of metrics available for us to say go or no go is the positivity rate.
Local, yep.
So is that the main metrics that we are going to be looking at when we come together for each of these next set of board meetings? So maybe let's answer, if you can answer that one before we sort of give our nod, I think that would be great.
On the metric side, yes, that local positivity rate seemed the most palatable, as we've had a few conversations with the board. And when I say local, I mean specifically Homewood Flossmoor. We haven't expanded it out because we capture all of Olympia Fields, Chicago Heights, and Hazel Crest, even though we only have slivers of those. So I don't think it's an exact science looking at the positivity rate, but certainly one that a number of school districts have latched onto is their local positivity rate broken down by zip codes, et cetera. So yes, we do need to have a hard look at those numbers. We'll bring them back on the 25th, and that will be included in our recommendation. But yes, looking at primarily at those local positivity numbers, Homewood Flossmoor specifically, and using the Northwestern site, which breaks everything down by area.
So can your recommendations also include, and maybe this is actually incumbent on the board to give you feedback between now and then, because I guess part of it is also what our comfort level is. And I actually even hate to say comfort level, because obviously if there is even a positivity rate like that, just, we want there to be 0%. But knowing that that's not going to be the case, we do need to figure out, we need to be comfortable with what it is that we set. And then if your recommendations can also include, if we say 8%, for example, under what circumstances or scenario would we reverse that and have to pull kids back out?
Okay.
So I think that would be helpful. So then we can expect to have a more detailed and robust conversation about the specifics on the go or no go for the rest of the population of our students when we come back together in a couple of weeks.
So I will bring you recommendations on the numbers and the ones that we should use, but then also we'll try to break out some of those scenarios. We know COVID is going to happen, it's here. So unfortunately, we will continue to have staff members, students, family members, unfortunately, who are diagnosed. And in those cases, we have to be laser focused. Our contact tracing has to be specific. Our cohorting has to be fantastic. All those different pieces, because then they will trigger, step B. Step B may be, in addition to individual quarantines and the contact tracing quarantines, depending on numbers, has there been transmission within the school? If there's transmission within the school, that's going to lead down one path. If it's not transmission within the school, it could lead down another path. So we'll try to break all of those different pieces out. And that's where that metric conversation gets really important, because the moderate community transmission level, which to me is the base set of metrics that we should use. Minimum community transmission, frankly, is more palatable, but depending on where we are, we may want to make a different decision on some of those metrics. But realistically, in that 5 to 8% hovering in there, you're in moderate community transmission, and the state would say, we could make a decision to reopen. You hop over that 8%, and that's where you get to severe community transmission, and then it gets tougher. So I think we'll have to be very clear, not only on the reopening metric, but also what will cause maybe a school closure, what would cause a larger a pause in our in-person program as well. So we'll have all of that information for the board.
And we feel comfortable giving a nod regarding our special ed students and our preschool students and the tier 3 students, because we are essentially talking about a much smaller in terms of number
Yes,
students in general.
correct. That's why I feel confident and comfortable having that conversation. We're basically in the same place as we were the last time we had those populations of kids in person, and we did it very effectively. Again, no in-school transmission. Of course, we had students who were quarantined for family reasons and any number of other family situations, but we did really well. Masks were excellent. The social distancing was great. The disinfecting was very effective. And so at the end of the day, we were able to do that effectively, and that's why we feel confident now. Now, again,
Okay.
as we
I
look
just want
at,
to make sure we have
Yeah.
all the information that we need to feel comfortable about giving a nod.
absolutely.
So is
And
there
and Michelle,
Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
yeah, and Michelle, yeah, and just with that, to close a loop that I've kind of been asking about, and Dana, could you also elaborate why we're not looking to expand this group to K through 3rd grade, and why they fall into, I guess, what would come in February?
Because it's not safe for those larger groups and managing those numbers. So at some point, this becomes a whole hog conversation. We either have to go or we don't. And we can reduce this incredibly complex conversation into some programs, right? Special education, remote from school, et cetera. No problem. As we start, getting into K3, and then as we start looking at other transitions, I know that our parents are very sensitive to changing teachers. We have to assume that every time we change a program or change a restart, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a percentage that a large number of kids are going to change teachers. Same thing with, hey, would you like to come back, for the 4th quarter? I mean, people are going to have to assume as they make these decisions that, they may end up with different teachers. So we're not recommending the K3, a full K3 start at this point, because I don't feel comfortable with the metrics. We can certainly look at those on a larger scale. But when you're talking about K3, now we're in that, 650 student range, 700 student range. And it gets a little bit trickier. If we're doing that, I suppose the flip side of that is, why wouldn't we do 4 through 8 as well?
So Dana, I'm a little confused. I'd asked earlier if, well, let me put it, it doesn't matter what I asked earlier. Okay, so parents are filling out a survey starting tomorrow, right?
Yes.
And they're going to be asked, when we go back to school, are you going to do remote, or do you want to stay remote, or do you want to come back to school 4 days a week, right?
Correct.
Okay. So if, say, 30% of our parents say, I want my kid to be in school 4 days a week, then even those who have chosen to stay remote may face a change in teacher, right? Okay. You had said earlier that the only way to guarantee that you'd have the same teacher is to pick remote, but that's
no, to stay remote. If we give in
the whole, the whole
as a district, if we stay remote, we can maintain.
All right. So, okay. So parents making their decision in answering this survey tomorrow, the next few days, should not, or at least, they can hope that if they stay remote, they get to keep their teacher, but they need to understand there's a chance that they're going to have a teacher change no matter what.
Yes, we'll make sure that all that is explained in the letter, because really, once we change programs, we open up all those class lists, because we'll have X number of percentage that wants to come back and X number of percentage that doesn't. We'll have to split those teachers.
Okay. And now, with the exception of the smaller group of students we've been discussing for some time here, the vast majority of parents in our district, nothing's opening until at least February 16th. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So unless you're in the special ed or tier 3 group that's being invited back soon, February 16th is the earliest date that you as a parent might have to deal with, changes in schedule, daycare, whatever. If, due to school possibly opening for your student.
Correct.
And we'll make that decision at our January 25th meeting.
Yes, and that gives us 3 weeks, assuming we have everything ready, and we should now, because we'll have the survey out, we'll have that data starting next week. We'll have all of that information for our conversation on the 25th. And so what we can do then is turn around on the 26th and send out all the information, give parents a 3-week lead time before any of those changes are implemented.
Okay.
I have a question. I think this will help parents as they're making a decision. That last bullet, students will remain in cohorts during the school day. I think for some parents, including me, it's difficult to imagine what that looks like. I can a little bit better for self-contained classrooms because they would typically stay together as a group. Specials are a little fuzzy for me, but for the middle school, does that mean that teachers will move to kids? What does it mean that they'll remain in cohorts? Are kids going to be in the same space for an entire day? Will that help with contact tracing? I think maybe it would be good to talk a little bit, as much as you can, about that.
Yeah, absolutely. In our original reopening plan, that for the most part, the plan was that teachers would switch classrooms versus students switching classrooms. So to minimize, not eliminate hallway movement, there will always be some level of hallway movement, but to minimize it, and also to allow for us to keep kids in specific rooms. So that would greatly reduce the hallway traffic. It would allow us to have the same people monitoring the same hallways. So we know exactly who would be transitioning within that small amount of movement that would still need to happen. So we would go back to our original reopening plan and take a look at teachers moving versus students moving.
Can I ask a quick question? That sounds very sensible. Will kids be allowed a movement break at some point while they are sort of seated in one spot?
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't just a junior high thing. I think across the board, we're going to elementary and junior high. We're going to need to do lots of stretch breaks and go noodles and times to get up and move, as well as incorporating mask breaks as part of our reopening plan as well. So when the weather permits, being able to get outside, take a break, and stretch as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Absolutely. Other questions?
I actually did have one. I'm going to just work on the assumption that you have learned a whole bunch from the experience in the fall to really apply for in terms of bringing kids back and seeing what worked great and what could be improved upon to kind of hedge our bets moving forward with our new plan. But I was going to make a suggestion of, or ask, do we have a glossary of terms for that go with our plans? And I say this, really on behalf of parents who might be slightly confused about some of these newer terms in terms of hybrid, remote person. If there was just some sort of quick access glossary so that they don't forget or get confused, that might be helpful. I certainly would appreciate that as a parent for any communication I got, but I think especially for this one, that it would be important, because we have already we've been talking about this all summer, but especially for parents who are participating more and more, that this might be something that they would really feel more comfortable if they were very clear about what remote in-person was as opposed to other instructional descriptors.
So
maybe
remote in person.
Comes out, yeah.
Did you have others that?
You know, just look, I mean, I've always admired your intelligence and, you know, your grasp of terminology, all of you. But I always, you know, I always caution that, you know, just make it as layman's term as possible for, you know, the consumer who's reading this, who, you know, does not have a, you know, depth of educational degrees. And even things like bus transportation, if you've never taken the bus or you're new to taking the bus because you moved to the district this year, and you know, you came from another district where you walked, this might be important. And I'm not saying, you know, let's not divert our curriculum to make this glossary, but, you know, just have things that would be important.
Yeah, actually, no, I think this fits in really well. In the reopening plan, there is a section, it's not our frequently asked questions, it's just, you know, important things to know kind of list. And so, I mean, this could easily fit into there with, you know, just like you said, just those big rocks. We don't need to get too specific. But
Yeah.
certainly we want to make sure that our parents know exactly what they're getting into. And as they're either reading the reopening document or looking at the letter tomorrow or the survey. So absolutely, we can, I think that's something that will help our communication and our community would appreciate.
Yeah, plus with the level of anxiety that goes up, the cognitive level decreases because you're so worried. It's hard to process information that sometimes we take for granted. Thank you.
Of course.
Dana, you mentioned 233 being different than us, but we have kids there. We have 7th and 8th graders there. So, and their current plan has impacted our students right now. Yes. So I'm wondering how this will work with that.
Yeah, so it has impacted the timing of when on some days when some of our students would be returning from their first period class and conflicts with their second period class at Parker. So I will continue to talk with the high school. I don't anticipate there being another change to the high school schedule at this point. But because we would still be, it's one or the other, it would be remote or full day remote or full day in person. I don't see any additional conflicts with that because the students would still be able to, even if they are in person, take their high school class remotely from the building because that class will still be offered remotely. So it would just be a matter of space and supervision for them to be able to take their class.
Yeah, okay. And thanks to Amabel and Jerry Anderson at the high school for working on that over break.
Can you include that in the FAQs in the document that you will be sharing? That would be great. Okay, so if we all feel comfortable with giving the nod for the 25th, you know, I can't see everybody on the screen, but you know, I got the stupid fly. I know I seem crazy doing this, but there is a giant fly in here.
Michelle, do you know Mike Pence?
That's just me. Okay,
on that note, okay, if we can all just like, you know, do a thumbs up, since we're not officially voting, then you're good to go. All right.
Great. Yes, and so what we will do is, I think the letter tomorrow may be a little bit longer than I prefer. I think we're going to have to hit 2 pages, but this is just really important. We want to make sure that everything is explained really well. We'll get the letter and the survey out tomorrow. We'll have a few surveys going out. We're working with the FEA tomorrow afternoon to tighten up the staff survey and just to start to address questions moving into this process. You know, we've had a lot of success having our teachers at the table, whether it's at the building leadership teams, the district leadership team, Judy Kubis and Kelly Rosales have always been good advocates for their members. And so we expect that to continue. We're meeting with the FEA tomorrow to continue to work on this. And really just now it's time to dig into, those tough issues, when do teachers come back? What are those really specific safety protocols that we'll implement to make sure that this goes smoothly? So a lot of work to be done over the next few weeks, but that's okay. We don't shy away from that. It's complex and we're going to get it figured out and we're going to move forward. Tunde, I see you have your hand up, but we're not taking audience questions. But if you would please call me tomorrow or email me at dsmith@sd161.org. That's dsmith@sd161.org. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We will look forward to receiving the next iteration of the plan. And I encourage everybody on the call, board members included, if we've got stuff after we've noodled on this a little bit, questions, comments, concerns, if we can feed those to Dana between now and, before we meet the next time, I think that would be great because we want to have as much information as we could possibly have before we vote. And just understanding, I know the goal is to get kids and teachers back in school safely. And even if we all vote yes, that we feel comfortable moving forward with a hybrid, it won't be perfect because there's no perfect way to do this. So, we are learning as we go. I don't think this is not March of 2020, right? Where we are totally, reading the manual and flying at the same time. So it's not that, but we're not expecting perfection, even though we have great expectations for our students and the instruction that our students receive. So everybody will do the absolute best that they can to make sure we are doing all that we can for our kids. That's the best thing that we could do.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we are coming to a close. We have a couple of items on the consent agenda that's listed under the consent agenda. So I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented, which includes the payroll for the month of December, the personnel report, minutes from the September 29th, 2020 Board of Ed meeting, executive session minutes, September 29th, 2020, the FOIA requests, the revised 2020-2021 calendar, bid recruiter, which I still don't like that name, video interviewing platform contract.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I've got a question. Dana, could you just enlighten me? The FOIA requests that we got, are those, was that like something very commonplace or was that something very specific?
Both. It's both specific and common that we would get those requests from various organizations. So nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe one was for all the information for our paraprofessionals, and then let me see the other one. Oh, unelected boards and officials. So typical information that requests that we receive that we process.
Yeah, because like I say, I know we get FOIA requests all the time. It's just that those two, I said, was it something that we need to be aware of? But if you think it's all germane, that's all good. No problem.
Yeah,
Thanks.
all good. Mm-hmm.
I had a question about bid recruiter. So
Yeah.
I know for this year, it's a gimme because it's with CARE. And so I like the fact that we're using the same technology as Fortune 500 companies. My question is, are we paying upfront or do we pay as we go? So meaning that if we find that we don't extract the value that we think we are going to get, or can we not expend all of it, or is it we pay up front and then we have got to live through it and go through the contract?
Yeah, we would be stuck with the contract, fulfilling those obligations. But I believe one of Eric's tasks with this company was to really focus on our hiring windows Yes, we hire year round. We know that. But April is not the same as December for hiring, not in a school district. And so really kind of maximizing which months we're paying, I think was certainly a big part of this. So it's just, we're starting on an annual basis. And then, if we fall in love and we want to extend a little bit and try to bring that annual cost down for a longer commitment, then I think they would be open to that.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Any other questions? Roll call, please.
Briggs,
Yes.
Paredes,
Yes.
Leedstra,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Lanier,
Yes.
Blackman,
Yes.
Horace.
Yes, and the motion has passed. Let's see. My document just closed. Sorry. We have a couple of other action items. Ms. Misha Blackman reviewed the bill for the month of January. Take it away.
So I it's pretty straightforward. We're not sending any money, yay us. For the question I did have, Fran answered it, and so there was no issues with these bills. So may I have a motion to approve the bills for the month of January in the amount of 100? Can you hear me?
Mhm.
People could, okay, all right, my screen froze, I'm sorry. I have a motion to approve the bills for the month of January in the amount of $154,074.62.
So moved.
Any questions? Roll call, please.
Paredes,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Griggs,
Yes.
Blackman,
Yes.
Lanier,
Yes.
Leedstra,
Yes.
Horace.
Yes, and the motion has passed. May I have a motion to rescind the honorable dismissal of educational support person?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Nelson,
Yes.
Blackman,
Yes.
Leedstra,
Yes.
Lanier,
Yes.
Griggs,
Yes.
Paredes,
Yes.
Horace.
Yes. Scott, can you come to my house and take it? Why, please?
Michelle, my daughter just said, Mom, the flag is back.
It's just,
Don't send it over here.
gosh, this is not the way to start the year.
No.
I just want to say that the last action item we just approved, I'm so happy that we are able to do that because I know that none of us, felt good about having to even discuss it at the last meeting. So we are so excited that we're able to do that. And so we hope that this is the way that it will stay for the rest of the school year.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's all we've got, folks.
That's it.
I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Clearly, you want to go. You want to see me continue to swat the fly, Carolyn? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that you did. Was that a second from Carolyn?
Yeah. Second.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay.
Yay! I'm unmuted.
The
That was me.
meeting is adjourned at 7:46 p.m. Have a awesome first week back, 161.
Happy New Year, everyone. It's so great to see you. Great job tonight, and look for that information tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Hey, everyone.